What's going on, guys? So today I'm going to be showing you the best cinematic settings for the Sony A7RV. These dials are going to be essential in order to make sure that we have preset frame rates for each one of these dial numbers. So the first thing I do is go to your menu setting and then go to your image quality settings, and then you have your file format. So this is key. Once you get to your file format, you have 8K H.265, which I don't use because it's pretty horrendous unless it's a stationary shot, but you have that option. And then you have an XAVC HS, which is the H.265 4K. I like to use this because it's very compressed and I'm able to capture a lot of footage. Another option is to do the XAVC S 4K, which is a H.264, which is still compressed, but not as compressed as the H.265. So it's a little bit easier on your computer, especially if you have an older computer. I would recommend using that. Or if that's tough for your computer, I will do the XAVC SI, which is gonna be really storage hungry. You won't be able to store much footage, but you'll get the highest bitrate quality and apparently the highest quality video straight from the camera. I haven't really noticed any difference between the two, so I would recommend just doing the HS if you can. If your computer can handle it, go with the HS or the S 4K. I'll set it at HS 4K, that's what I like to do. And then I set my frame rate at 24 frames per second. And your record setting as 100 megabits at 422 10-bit. I like the 422 10-bit because the highest quality that I can get. You'll notice if you go to your all intra, you go to your 24, you get a higher bit rate at 240. It requires a lot of storage because of that higher bit rate, but that's just an example. But in this case, I'll just do XAVC HS 4K and get it at 24 frames per second at 100 megabits, 422 10-bit. And then from there, I like my S&Q setting at 60 frames per second. You can change these whatever you want. I'll change that to 100 megabits, 422 10-bit. And then you have your record frame rate at 24. So it'll play back at 24 frames per second, but your frame is gonna be 60, so it's gonna be slowed down. After that, make sure you double your frame rate so you have 1/50th of a second. And then once you have those dialed in, so let's go to your picture profile. If you go to your color, exposure and color, and then you go to your color tone, and then you'll see the picture profile here. I'll actually show it a little bit. So this is picture profile 8, which is my S-Log3, S-Gamut 3 Cine. There's only 3 picture profiles I like to use, which is PP8, which is your S-Log3, which requires a lot of color grading. If you like color grading, I would recommend using that. And then PP11 S-Cinetone, which is really nice. It requires less color grading and it looks good straight out of camera. So once you get your picture profile set, let's go to your shooting mode. And then this is where you set your camera setting at these specific dials. So right here, I'm gonna set it at dial 1. Make sure you're on video mode, and then we'll select that and press OK. Now it's registered. So if we go back to manual, we go back to your manual mode in video, and then if I go to 1, it should automatically set at 1/50th, 2.8, 4K 24. Another thing you want to do if you're shooting S-Log3 is make sure that you set up your gamut assist, which is gonna be here. So gamma display assist, I like to set it at auto. So every time I'm shooting S-Log3, it's gonna give you some color contrast that you need to judge your exposure and everything. So this is really nice to have. Make sure this is on auto. So this will automatically give the S-Log footage some contrast. Now let's set up your frame rate for your dial 2 settings. So your dial 2 settings, I typically like to use 4K 60 for slow motion and give it that dreamy look. Let's do that same procedure again. Let's go to your menu, image quality, 4K HS, H.265. And then from here, you only have 2 options, 24 and 60. So in this case, we're gonna use 60 for your dial 2 settings. Your record setting, I like to set it at the highest, which is 200 megabits, 422 10-bit. So there. And then S&Q setting, I'll keep the S and Q settings the same. But keep in mind on S and Q there's no audio, so just keep that in mind. And then let's back out and then make sure that our frame rate is double the shutter speed. So we'll go 1/125th of a second. So now we're dialed in for our settings for our 4K 60. Let's double check. We have our picture profile set, shooting mode, camera set. Let's go to dial setting 2. Now it's registered. So you want to double check that. So you just go press that dial. So see that crop? If you see that crop, that is the crop that 4K 60. It is a 1.25 crop. As you'll notice, you go back and forth, 4K 24 and then 4K 60. So the last dial number that I set, I like to set my dial number 3 at 120 frames per second. So now let's do that same procedure again. Let's go back to image quality. So this is the A7RV does not shoot 4K 120. So we have to go to XAVC SHD, which is the HD, full HD recording format. So now we'll go to record frame rate. Now you'll see the 120 frames per second. In this case, we'll change that to 120p and set the record setting now at 100 megabits at 420 8-bit. So if you want the highest quality in 120 frames per second, this is what I like to do. I like to do the S&Q settings. So I have my record frame rate at 24 frames per second, and then my frame rate, I like to change that to 120 frames per second. And then from here, you can change your record setting now to 422 10-bit at 50 megabits per second. So this is the highest quality you can get at 120 frames per second. So now since we have that set up, let's go back out and then make sure we set our your shutter speed, double our frame rate. So I like to set that at 258th of a second. So we set our shutter speed at 258th of a second. And then now let's go back to your shooting mode, camera set memory, which is gonna be number 3. Let's register that in dial 3. Now, every time we go back to 3, it's at HD 120, and then 4K 60, and then 4K 24. Once you finish your custom dial setting setup, now we have to set up your custom buttons. Going to your briefcase menu, which is your setup menu, and then your operation customize. And under that operation customize, go to custom key dial with the video icon. The first setup is the rear custom buttons, which is the AEL autofocus on button, the C1, C3, and the trash can button, which is in my case, I like to set my picture profile as my AF button, which is number 1 here. And then number 2, which is the AF on button, I like that to set that as the switch focus area. A switch focus button area enables you to switch between focus area zone, center fix, spot medium, spot large, expand spot, which enables you to move around your spot from here, and then wide. And then on custom button number 3, which is your C1, I like to set that as my subject recognition autofocus. Custom number 4, I like to set that as my APS-C, Super 35, or full frame mode. This enables you to crop in and then crop out, which is gonna be Super 35 and then full frame. This comes in handy if you have a fixed lens, you can zoom in and out without losing resolutions. And then the last button, which is the trash can button, I like to set that as my touch operation select. This enables the touch screen on the LCD screen to be on or off. And then on the rear 2 custom button settings, that's gonna be on the dials and the joystick, the little joystick on the top of the dial. So the joystick or custom button number 1 of the rear 2 dial or rear 2 custom buttons, I like to set that as the focus standard. On custom number 2, on the rear 2 dial settings, I like to set that as my grid line display select. And then 3, I like to set that as my zebra display select. And then 4 is gonna be my peaking display select. And then number 5 is gonna be my grid line type. And then my top custom button, which is gonna be C2, and the record button. The record button I like to set as my ISO, and then my C2 button I like to set that as my white balance. And the reason why I do that is because I'm so used to having that old C1 button, which is now the record button, now to be my ISO. That's why. But you can leave that as your record button if you like. And then the C2 white balance. And then for the lens, if you have a Sony G Master lens, obviously you'll have a custom button on the actual lens. And I just set that as my focus hold button. And then lastly, on the dial wheel, I have my aperture on the front, and then I have my shutter speed at the rear dial. And then I have this as my compensation. For the custom dial, I like to set that as my ISO. And this enables you to change your ISO pretty rapidly, as you can just change it really quickly using the dials instead of doing this and then going back and forth. It's pretty fast when you just do it with a dial. So lastly, let's set up your function menu settings. So if you go to your function menu settings, you have your photo function menu, and then you have your video function menu. In the video function menu, I like the first item to be the steady shot. This enables you to choose between active, standard, or off. The second item that I like to use is the subject recognition target. And then the subject recognition target allows you to choose between human, animal and bird, animal, bird, and then you have insect, car and train, and then your airplane. The third item that I like to have it set as is gonna be the breathing compensation. Obviously, this is really handy for video. You don't want your photo lens to be breathing really heavily. And then the fourth item, I like to use audio record level. The fifth item, autofocus transition speed. This is pretty handy whenever you're using autofocus if you wanted to lock in really fast on a subject or give it a little bit of a slower transition. And then priority set white balance. This is really handy for if you want to set your white balance accordingly. Like let's say you want it set to priority white or ambiance or just standard. Then the next item is going to be the face memory. This comes in handy if you want to have custom faces memorized. It'll make your camera focus on that person. This comes in super handy. I like that on my shortcut menu. Yeah, variable shutter speed allows you to fine tune your shutter speed. And this comes in handy if you have flickering lights. And then register face on and off. Next item is going to be peaking. I can preset it to high, mid, or low. And then zebra level, I can tune that depending on what I need. And then record media settings. So that's it, guys. So that's how I set up my camera. Hopefully that helps you out. If you like this video, if you like photo, video tutorials and stuff like this, camera stuff, give me a like, subscribe, and see you in the next one.